how to disagree well. And I'm going to start off by saying that, now I'm going to give you the next slide, by saying that I actually really enjoy a good debate. I'm constitutionally made up to, I like to win, and I really like words and the subtlety of words, and I took debate classes in high school, but this really has been a burden on my heart for some time, the need for the church to think more about this and talk more about this, how to disagree well. Before I was a sister, I was an English teacher. And so basically tonight I'm going to do the English teacher part of this talk, and then Michael's going to do the theological part, as a theology student that he is. So Margaret already sent you a handout, and one part of that handout is some logical fallacies. And as I've been reading the media and hearing arguments, and I just chose the ones that seem the most common in this moment. And we don't have time to go into everything, so I leave it for you. And I use it, I think it's good to use it as an evaluation of your own speech and your own social media posts and your own writing, to see if you're really being grounded in truth or if you have errors in your thinking. And also to evaluate what you see and hear and read, because there's a lot of fallacies. For example, one of them is a hasty generalization or an unwarranted generalization. So anytime you hear every, all, none, anytime you hear words that are totalizing like that, doesn't mean that they're going to be a fallacy, but be on your guard. So if you say anything other than all men are human, it's probably going to be a logical fallacy, because there's going to be an exception or many exceptions. So just be on your guard. So use that to help evaluate what you see. And then an article that I read online that I thought was very good about the need for civil discourse. So those are just for you to keep and to think about, and we don't have time for all of them. Today we're going to talk about, first I'm going to talk about some keys for civil discourse, and then a proposed method that I want to propose to all of us to start practicing if we don't already. So the first key is participate because you want to pursue truth. That has to be our motivation. I know it's really easy to get caught up in discussions, I think especially on social media or about current events. And a lot of times our passions are really involved. Like something upset us or frustrates us, or or maybe we just really want to win. Make sure that you're pursuing truth. If the motivation is other than to pursue truth, it's not going to be a good or a very civil conversation. And it's not going to lead to the discovery of deeper truth, which is what should motivate us when we're having a discussion or a debate. So check your motivation. Am I still pursuing truth, or now have I become intent upon winning this argument? Am I saying this because it's going to help us arrive at the truth, or because I want to beat this other person? So participate because you want to pursue truth. That truth be your motivation. The second key, make sure that your focus is on the issue at hand. One big breakdown in civil discourse happens when we turn from the issue and focus on the person. So maybe Teresa and I are having a conversation, and it starts to get a little heated because we disagree on a topic. And I shift from talking about the topic and I say, well, of course you'd think that because you're whatever. Then I just shifted. I'm not focused on the issue anymore, and I turn to attack her. That's a really common fallacy. It's called ad hominem, which is against the man or against the person. Or I distract and I focus on some minor point that's not really the issue at hand, so that we stop talking about what's really important. That's called a red herring. So focus on the issue at hand. That's a really important thing to do. So I know, and for example, if you watch a political debate, I don't know why you would, but if you do, you'll hear every time they bring up an issue, they shift. There's a lot of shifting. Not every time. That would be a hasty generalization. Quite often, there's a lot of shifting. The third key, when you're focused on the issue, is be able to break that issue into its component parts. Most issues are complex. They're not just one thing. So for example, what are the protests about in our city at the moment? Black Lives Matter, right? So the Black Lives Matter is a movement. And one key issue is ending racial inequality. But if you look on their website, there's a whole bunch of other issues that are part of this issue for them. They say, police brutality, criminal justice reform, Black immigration, economic injustice, LGBTQIA+ and human rights, environmental injustice, access to healthcare, access to quality education, voting rights. So to actually speak about the issue of Black Lives Matter, you have to understand all of these, be able to speak about all of these parts, know that they're all part of what the protests are about. So, and you would also have to be able to speak about the proposal of the movement for each of those parts. Does that make sense? So be able to break the issue into its parts. The fourth key is be able to understand the issue and all of its parts. So understand the issue as a whole and all of its parts. And there are 6 basic questions that we all need to be asking. Who, what, where, why, when, and how. So for example, if you take out the issue of racial inequalities in healthcare, that's one component. So say that. What inequalities exist? You'd have to know that. Why do those inequalities exist? Because there can be different roots, different reasons for things, different causes. What could be done to eliminate those? How could it be done? What would be the cost? Who would need to be involved? How long is it going to take? So when are they going to happen? So there'd be what would be most effective? What are the different options out there? So you need to research, you need to actually understand the issue and all of its parts. And that's an important key, is to really understand it, because otherwise the position you take is not a very reasoned position. If I don't understand an issue, my position is partially reasoned or not very reasoned. So we need to understand them. And especially in a case where many things are grouped under one slogan. That happens in any presidential election too, right? Or any election, there's like a slogan, a campaign slogan. Okay, what does that mean? And what are they proposing and how are they proposing? So understand the issue and its parts. The 5th key is to be open to changing your mind. You're not really having a conversation if you're not really pursuing truth, if you're not open to the possibility that there's something you don't know, that you can't learn something. So we have to have the possibility of changing our mind when we receive new information, on both at the issue at hand or the people who hold a different position than you. Most of the topics being debated in the world and in the church right now are not dogmas of faith. For example, do we need to wear masks in public or not? Not mentioned in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, not a dogma of our faith. Should we vaccinate our children or not? Not mentioned in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, not a dogma of faith. Do we defund the police or not? The police are not mentioned in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and neither is funding of police. Who do you vote for in November? None of the candidates are in the Catechism for the Catholic Church. All those things are things that we can have opinions about, and we can have different opinions about. But we should be able to listen to the opinions of others with the possibility of learning more and letting that change our own beliefs, our own opinions. And the 6th key, although I think this is the most critically important one, is to listen. To listen. Actively listen to others when you're having a discussion or a conversation with them. What are they saying? Why are they saying it? Listen respectfully. If you're having a face-to-face conversation, look the other person in the eye. Give nonverbal feedback like nodding or smiling, and also you can state back to them what they're saying. You can make little phrases like, oh, I see, okay, I understand. Avoid interrupting them or I think I don't need to say this to this group, or any immature responses like rolling your eyes or sighing or tapping your fingers, any signs of impatience. You can ask questions to clarify and deepen your understanding, but those questions should always be calm, unbiased, and dispassionate. So I shouldn't say, maybe Sydney and I are having a conversation and I'm starting to feel like frustrated at her position. I think it's unreasonable. Like, how can you possibly believe that? That's not a valid question. oh, that's really interesting, Sydney. When did you begin to believe that? That would be a valid question. Or how did you come to hold that position? You should be able to listen so well that you understand what the person you're listening to is saying, what their position is, why they have that position, and how they feel about it. So to listen well, you have to silence your own responses, your internal reactions, the arguments that go on in your head, and empathically put yourself in the mind of the other. Really listen to them. Try to understand them. I was speaking with someone a while back, and they were telling me about when they were young in their marriage, they went through marriage counseling. And they shared with me that their marriage counselor basically made them do this: listen to the other person and say back until the other person was satisfied that they had been understood. Well, that's great. How often do we do that? How often, when someone is speaking and you already know you disagree, are you arguing in your head already? You're coming up with your next point to rebut them when they're speaking. That's not listening. So listen, that's the main key. And if you're listening in a written document or on social media, before arguing, how good would it be if you wrote back on your post, well, that's really interesting. I understand that you're saying da, 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 da. Do I have that right? And when they say, yes, you have it right, then you respond with what you're thinking and your position on the issue. To be able to state back what they're saying to you in non-biased language, and always keep your own responses respectful, thoughtful, and charitable. So those are the keys, I think, for civil discourse. Pursue truth, focus on the issue at hand, break that issue into its component parts, understand the issue in its parts, be open to changing your mind, and really listen, which may be the hardest one of all and the most important one of all. So I included listening I could have put it first, but I put it last because it's kind of a hinge between the keys and what I want to propose tonight as a method. So this method is based on Rogerian rhetoric. So there's two kinds of, I used to teach argument writing. Every term I had a class on argument writing. So there's two main kinds. One is Aristotelian argument, which is what we're all used to, where you state your position, rebut the other position, and then state your position again. Rogerian rhetoric, Rogerian argument is different. So instead of trying to win, you're trying to find common ground to propose something that's mutually agreeable. You're trying to have both sides win. And it's different than a compromise. It's actually trying to make both sides win. And I want to propose that as a method for civil discourse in this time, which is kind of fraught with quite often pretty violent language in our communications online and in person, and pretty violent in the protests we're seeing. And so I propose this as a method. And the first step is to listen. So everything I just said, listen until you can say back to the other person's satisfaction that you were non-biased and are truly representing what they said. It's really so helpful. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation where you experience that the other person really heard you. Something about your soul rests when you're really listened to. Something about you rests, you feel understood and known. That actually opens you up more to the other person as well. So listen. Step one. Step two, say back to them what they said without using any biased language. Just accurately summarizing their position and their reasons for holding it. It's a fruit of the act of listening. When I would teach argument writing, both at Lynn Benton and at OSU, my students had so much difficulty doing this. They couldn't do it. It was really, really hard for them because they weren't used to listening. And summarizing without trying to already undermine the other person's position was it was really difficult for them, but it's really important. So when the other person is satisfied that you understand, then you move on to stating your position. So then you state your position, but clearly and reasonably, laying out what you believe and why you believe it, avoiding logical fallacies, avoiding any implicit attack on the other person or the other people who hold a different opinion. The key when you say your opinion is to argue for what you believe and not against what someone else believes. they say, this is what they believe, you say back. This is what you believe. Here's what I believe, but not arguing against them. And then the fourth, find common ground. And this really means, where do you stand together? Where can you stand together? So, well, really on the pro-life issue, I had a very hard time finding common ground. Like the pro-life and ardent pro-life and ardent pro-choice. I have a very hard time finding anything in common. But on most issues, we have something in common. So, for example, right now, what do we have in common? We believe, of course, I mean, I don't know where you stand on any issues. I'm just thinking of like protests and where do we stand in common? Racism is wrong. Okay, there should be equality in healthcare, in policing, in schooling, and so there's a lot of common ground that you can establish with people and then try to find a solution. So finding common ground is not the same as compromising. It's not, in a compromise, you give something and I give something and we end up with like something watered down that neither of us are really happy with. When you find common ground, you say, I stand here and you stand here. Okay, there's all this other stuff that we don't have in common, but here's where we are. Here's where we stand together. And when you can find that, it unites instead of making something different. Sometimes it's a very deep value that you have in common and not so much the actual position. Where do you and I agree? That's the key. If we can identify what we have in common, we can start to work together. Of course, in a limited way, but it's a beginning. This, of course, requires that both parties be seeking the truth and wanting to work together. Because if someone's entrenched and they're not open, you can look for all the common ground you want, but if they don't want to stand on it with you, they're not going to. But most people, I think, have goodwill. And then finally, you propose a mutually agreeable solution based only on that common ground. So you don't try to inject any of your advantage or any of their advantage, just on that common ground, what's a solution we can build together? It can't favor one party over the other. Again, it's not a compromise or a trade, where I'll give you 2 of this for 3 of that, but a solution that's built on that common ground. And it's really powerful when we start to speak with each other in this way. It's really powerful if we start to solve problems in this way. So that's why I want to propose it tonight as a method that comes from my rhetorical studies in grad school and my teaching days. And now I'm going to pass it over to Michael. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Michael, who, as you know, is studying theology, and he's going to do the application in the church, why this is important in the church and how to apply it in the church. Michael?
Okay, thank you. Well, that will basically be a version of the model that I'll propose too. So you'll see I just type something into the chat. I'm going to look at kind of, I guess you could say, bigger picture, taking off from the rules of the road that Sister Teresa has sketched out, and talk about kind of 3 common models that we see, not proposed necessarily as ideals, but the way that we tend to conduct discourse and tend to be influenced in our conversations. So we can talk about this first model as the entertainment or contest model, which is more like a style of conversation. The second is the self-sufficient knower, or what I call the discourse forager model, which is itself, as I'll come to argue a little bit, a kind of anti-discourse. And the third is the proposition for the Catholic Christian ideal, or the body of Christ model, which actually has a lot in common with Rogerian argument. So just to begin in kind of on the first model of how we tend to speak with one another. This one is fueled kind of by our excitement and bemusement when 2 people will clash on the public stage. It's kind of the winner-take-all polarizing spectacle, this model of the entertaining contest. So the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about, we see it kind of everywhere on like Crossfire TV shows, anytime you're pitting 2 people against one another, or multiple people. But when I came home from school as a kid, in high school every day there was a show on ESPN called Around the Horn. And basically it was a collection of sports writers who would call in, and they'd put them each in boxes, kind of like their own Zoom boxes. and you had this mischievous moderator who would pose questions about insubstantial enough topics, like should the Trailblazers trade Damian Lillard, something like that. And then each sports writer would weigh in. So the moderator has a clicker to give points, a big red button to beep for answers that he judges to be bad, and a mute button to silence whomever he chooses whenever he wants. So you can imagine with the setup, the moderator would kind of toy with his guests, right? He'll mute one guy, and then the guy will gesticulate wildly to try to protest, no avail, as everybody else carries on. And then the moderator will eventually unmute him, and he'll be screaming about the injustice of it all when he gets back on. And the show kind of carries on like this, as the contestants tease one another and disagree with one another. And then at the end of the day, one emerges somewhat arbitrarily as the big winner, at which point the moderator presses his fake applause button, and that's the show. So this kind of setup can be sort of innocuous enough in its own delimited space. But what I think we're all more or less aware of is the way that this kind of entertainment contest mode of conducting ourselves has more traction than that. I remember watching the presidential debate, not a recent one, so Father Ignacio doesn't have to worry, but the debate of 2012 between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. And I remember being surprised and disturbed at the way that Obama and Romney, who were two men who, by the way, in their general conduct suggest both eminence and civility, seemed to kind of give in to this prevailing cultural model. It was like at times the debate descended into, a talk show point scoring contest, and the around the horn moderator would not have been at all out of place with a little clicker kind of giving them points as they spoke. And you could feel the candidates, they weren't so much probing the issues, but probing for the line that would be replayed on the news, or for the put down that would really crackle and then excite the audience. So I had the feeling, even in watching this, knowing how they had campaigned, that this wasn't really totally a reflection of their own characters. Obviously, they've given into something, but there was a way in which that discourse had been determinative. And the weakness wasn't that they were inherently, immutably these soundbite people, but they had adopted uncritically the conventions that people were kind of looking for. And what these conventions tend to do, as Sister Teresa has pointed out to a certain extent, is they obscure depths, they promote zero-sum thinking at the expense of more nuanced thinking, and they encourage division. So that would be, in some, kind of the around the horn and presidential debate, in not the Lincoln Douglas debates exactly, but certain presidential debates. That would be your example of this first model that I laid out. Now the second one, as I mentioned, is a kind of anti-discourse in a way, because it's not so much a model in and of itself as it is a way of using public discourse to feed oneself, right? It's driven by this individual quest to come to a kind of more comprehensive understanding of the world through engagement with people's opinions and perspectives, all of which is played out in the public sphere. So it's a way of using the public forum as a kind of laboratory, or you can imagine kind of setting up a ladder which can be kicked away when we feel like we've grown to a deeper understanding. It's not being in the public square for the sake of the common good, so much as it is to gain a kind of understanding, which we then want to privatize, which will serve our growth or serve our advancement. And to give this phenomenon kind of a cynical name, you could call it like the personal enlightenment project. And what it is discourse in service to the self. And kind of getting around what's going on here, what we're kind of trying to gain in an environment when we're kind of seeking self-growth as an end-all be-all principle, and wondering where those kinds of historical lineages that have us thinking that way come from, because I do think it's something that's pretty deeply subconsciously rooted in our culture. And so we could say maybe it's human nature itself. We could do the kind of popular Catholic thing. There's a certain style of thinking where you can trace every modern pathology to the Protestant Reformation. I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but there is something to what happened in that period, where you have the beginning of a splintering into denominations, separate denominations, which kind of leaves you with this dizzying array of choices between belief systems, modes of interpreting the Bible, and so on and so forth. And what starts to grow up, especially sometimes in a pluralistic culture, not being critical of a pluralistic culture, but it can be a mentality that tends to be adopted, is you end up in this kind of insecure intellectual space. It's like
Well, it does appear to be that we've got Michael frozen.
He was having some connection problems at the beginning.
We're giving him a phone. We're giving him a phone.
Thank you, Allie.
You're the best.
Okay, thank you guys. That's my team. So where did I, sister, where did I?
You stopped at the word intellectual.
Oh, thanks, Allie. Okay, so I was talking about this kind of insecure intellectual space that we can get into. All of us, which kind of seems to be sort of normal in our culture, right? Where you feel like you have to fend for yourself amidst of a chorus of voices who are all sort of asking for your assent. So I was talking about how it's kind of like walking down a European tourist street and being tugged on by a restaurateur at every single entryway, right? Asking you to come in and taste their food. And here, bear in mind with that little lapse, what we're looking at is this kind of mentality of feeding oneself through public discourse in order to grow or develop in certain ways. And then in the end goal being kind of a privatization of knowledge or of life in a sense. So we can talk about that kind of Reformation era splintering. We could talk also about the Enlightenment project itself, not unrelated to the Reformation, where we're setting up this scheme of this rational, autonomous knower who's operating free from religious custom, I put in quotes, and is seeking kind of an increasingly independent quest to attain to the truth. We could talk about a consumerist ethos where we're constantly at pains to manage this infinite marketplace of goods and decide what's the best option out there. But all in all, the resting place that we come to, and again, I want to kind of trigger, evoke the familiarity of this, is this place in which we kind of feel as if we're asked to bear the weight and burden of reality on each of our own backs, kind of decide things for ourselves, where we're seen as, in a way, as good as our opinions, or even constituted by our opinions. So it's a movement from Descartes in the Enlightenment era saying, I think, therefore I am, to the kind of present day adage that we could construct to get to the heart of what's going on, to I have an opinion, therefore I am. And so I want to say that the space that we're in can be really paradoxical and difficult to navigate, because the more we're asked to master this kind of whole field as individuals, the less we can depend upon an individual's view, paradoxically, right? Because there's too much out there. And the more we tend to fall back on these prepackaged ideas, which, as we all know, often come in boxed sets, right? If you take one idea, then you're kind of taking the rest too. We can see that arrangement in political parties. We can see it in media organizations, sort of everywhere. So we have this opening into this wider sphere where our opinions are potentially dangerously, at its worst, dictated to us, and we're asked to take one side or the other. And it's dangerous because we're absorbed into a kind of collective mind, right? That's including background influences that we're not always aware. So we lose ourselves a little bit and are kind of rightly suspicious of how we're shaped. We're relying on these binaries. So you can talk about conservatives mistrusting liberal media you can talk about liberals mistrusting conservative media, but I think there's a point to be made that the truth is often enough that conservatives mistrust conservative media and liberals mistrust liberal media, because there's this kind of uncertain, sort of shaky landscape that we're navigating. So as we all know, we get to one of the places that we see our country in now, this climate breeding polarization, as we're asked to choose either this side or that. Skepticism, as we perceive toxins to be in the air of both camps, but we can't quite put our finger on what they are. Impatience, as we know that we're asked to assimilate more than we can reasonably digest. And this temptation of false certitude, because of the emphasis that's placed upon settling opinions in this kind of autonomous project that can be absorbed into our bloodstream. And at the end of the day, too often the case will be that we all, not all of us, but there's a tendency to lapse into kind of a pervasive cynicism about public discourse, about its potential and its goodness. So what I want to say, so that's model 1 and model 2, model 1 being the entertainment or contest model, model 2 being this anti-discourse of the self-sufficient knower. And the third one that's kind of right in front of our noses as Catholics is apart from both of them. So we're called not to begin from this prideful, aggressive stance of the entertainer competitor, who either conquers or gets crushed or muted, as the case may be, nor from the anxious position of the self-sufficient knower, who feels like he or she, like Atlas, must carry the world on their back, but from a place where the truth exists in common and as common, where the truth is best discerned in concert and with a spirit of trust in God and in one another. And when we say that, we need to know that there's not just kind of this triumphalistic sense of things. We know that our confidence always has to be counterbalanced by our awareness of our own sinfulness, of our finite human limitations, and by the knowledge that our conclusions, especially as Sister Teresa was saying, in these kind of fluid spheres of gauging and discerning social reality, our conclusions are subject to error and must remain, I want to say, on some level provisional and open to development. So to compare briefly what I'm talking about with what I just spoke of, especially that kind of idea of opinions being dictated, of swimming in this big sea where it's hard to find your footing, of the kind of collective mind or a collective pole taking over and directing in a way that puts us ill at ease. We could say that it's definitely a stereotype of the Catholic Church that the Church is this kind of ultimate dictator of opinion, right? It can easily be confused as just another group that sets the terms and asks everyone to fall into line. The Catholic faith is often confused, in other words, for an ideology or an approach to reality built upon ideas. But this stereotype doesn't do justice to the Church's notion of truth, right? Which is always going to be a living truth, rooted in the person of Jesus Christ, therefore dynamic, rooted in eternity, but reaching us within time and changing our hearts within time, calling us always to fresh outlooks and commitments. And there are certitudes that we hold fast to, like Sister Teresa was mentioning, dogma, for instance, the divine and human nature of Jesus Christ. There are moral stances that we hold to be beyond dispute, like opposition to abortion. But in so many cases, in meeting these layered social issues, like our current societal unrest, we acknowledge the need for common discernment in the Holy Spirit, for creative engagement with one another that helps us to see beyond ourselves and beyond our own interests. So it's always going to be kind of like the Rogerian form of argument. It's always going to be a collaborative enterprise. And we're going to be called to embark on a task together, not in private. Plato said that truth is best arrived at through familial discussion. And I think that can be a good takeoff point for us, right? So it's not the argument between opponents in which one lives and one dies of the first model. It's not the private search for truth where we kind of gather in what we need to know like a squirrel and retreat to our private sphere. But it's a setting of trust and shared discernment. in the church, we're all very well set up to partake in this familiar discussion, right? We're each, as 1 Corinthians 12 teaches us, a part of the body. Tyler and Eileen were talking about this in our past, one of our past talks. So in that chapter of Corinthians, we hear that the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, right? So we understand ourselves to be a part, and therefore we shouldn't be discouraged when we find our perspective too to be partial, in need of influence from others who are seen from a different standpoint. And it's not only that this other standpoint is there for our own good. This is true too, that it kind of informs and influences us, but each takeoff point, each kind of return to truth, then becomes something that we carry forward in service to the whole. And as a body, we're not only engaged in these multiple distinct functions, but also engaged in a process of mutual transformation and purification, just as a body depends upon all of its parts to maintain equilibrium and correct imbalances. So our community then, if we're taking this seriously, is made up of people who we have to presume surround us by virtue of God's providence to help us, but also to pressure us into transformation. And these kinds of pressures too are helping us, whether it feels that way or not. So the perfection and the development of the body of Christ, in other words, necessarily includes the transformation of the body's members, of me and of you. So bringing our ideas and our own experiences, which are always distorted by our own sinfulness, limited by our own partiality, into the body for purification, and something happens, something changes there. When we enter in with humility, with the expectation that we will be changed, just as our perspective will benefit others, that's when kind of radical growth in discourse can start to happen. I know that I'm guilty often of, if I'm, stuck in a certain kind of conflict or intellectual spat or whatever it is, of assuming that like I'm the one that's heaven sent to change the other person, seeing the splinter before the beam. So when I think of debates that I've been involved in the past, if you say, okay, what's going on here is you guys are both involved in this as a way of doing God's will, as influencing one another. And if you were to ask me the question, who is there to change whom, right? You can think about this. The instinctual response is always like, oh, they're the one who is closed-minded or is missing the point. And then I'm there to kind of press them into the fullness of truth or whatever it is. And we can see how wrong we are when we understand that everybody has more or less that same perspective. But I think something important to bear in mind is that the end game isn't this result where somebody's coming fully to share my view necessarily, but a situation where both of us are moved to a kind of different experience of the world, to a subtle shifting of weight, perhaps to the pacifying of a misplaced passion, to an increased desire to listen to someone who is previously overlooked, things like that. And the new acceptance that's assisting me and the other person may not be what either of us had in mind, right? And certainly not if I've conceived of myself as a sort of angelic instructor of the deviant or something like that. But when we're entrusting ourselves to one another in humility, to this process of reciprocal influence, we're moved, something good happens, and we're making room for the Spirit. Okay, so to close up with some concluding thoughts on what enables all of this to happen, right? How does this discourse kind of enact itself? Certainly not according to our sheer will. Undergirding this scene of our mutual transformation is a standard that we can refer to, but also something that is given to us as a gift in our hearts that enables us to go on. And this is an overriding single standard or rule that we need to always bear in mind, and which at many points will just kind of introduce itself into our awareness of charity, right? So it's charity that stands above, sits beneath, and fills in the in-between spaces of our discourse. So Christ teaches in his new commandment to love one another as he loved us. The rule of charity then is what we're returning to. It's the only compass that's necessary, and not the charity exactly of be nice, but something deeper than that, because love and truth are going to be united. Wisdom is going to realize itself most fully, not through the mastery of a vast body of knowledge, but through the practice of love in the concrete. So serving charity then cannot mean, just by definition, ignoring or undermining the truth or sidelining wisdom. And charity itself is a foundation that bids us to seek concord. As the first letter of John reads, whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and there is not, whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and there is nothing in him that causes scandal. So when we operate according to Christ's teaching, we see converging these three realities. One, the love of one another, whoever loves his brother. Two, the light of truth, abiding in the light. And three, the preservation of unity and the aversion of scandal. So I would propose that this verse could be kind of our starting point for our own discourse. And we should find then in our conversations a patience, a humility, a shared commitment, most of all, a willingness to listen and to be changed that resembles no other discourse. The governing principle then would not quite be the quest for victory over another that characterizes the first discourse, nor the individual search for truth that defines the second anti-discourse, but the common project where truth and love are one, and wherein charity holds the diverse parts of the living body in union.